Blood has a memory longer than men. It remembers where it was spilled and why long after the bodies have turned to dust. In the far reaches of New Mexico Territory, 1879, an aging warhorse stands motionless atop a sandstone ridge, nostrils flaring at the scent of approaching storm. Like his master, a soldier with too many ghosts and too few years left to outrun them, the stallion bears the scars of battles fought and sins committed under a flag that promised honor but delivered shame. 15 winters have passed since the massacre. 15 winters of nightmares of women's screams and children's cries echoing across blood-soaked snow. 15 winters of a truth buried by powerful men who rewrote history with the same hands that signed the orders. But buried truths, like buried bodies, have a way of clawing back to the surface. And when they do, even the most carefully constructed fortresses of lies will crumble beneath the last defiant roar of an old horse and his rider charging once more toward redemption or damnation. The sun set crimson over the jagged horizon of New Mexico Territory, 1879. From the ridge of weathered sandstone, the land below resembled a vast ocean of golden grass, punctuated by islands of scrub brush and lonesome mesas. The air hung still and heavy, carrying only the whisper of distant thunder. Colonel Gabriel M. Harlan stood motionless at the edge of his property, watching as twilight claimed the land. At 63, his tall frame remained unbent by age, though the years had etched deep lines across his leathery face. Silver gray hair, once regulation short, now fell to his shoulders, and a beard equally gray concealed the lower half of his face. Only his eyes remained unchanged, pale blue and cold, as winter ice set deep beneath a prominent brow. Liberty, his aging black stallion, shifted beneath him. The horse had been with him for 15 years, a relic from his cavalry days. Like Harlan himself, Liberty bore the marks of too many battles, a notched ear, a faded scar across his left flank, and a temperament that trusted no one save his master. "Easy, old friend," Harlan murmured, his voice a graveled whisper from years of shouting commands and breathing dust. Nothing out there tonight but ghosts, and there were always ghosts. The ranch sprawled behind him, a collection of sturdy buildings that revealed little of their purpose to distant observers. No cattle grazed these lands. No crops grew in neat rows. Instead, hidden among ravines and sheltered valleys, Harlan bred and trained the finest military horses in the territory. It was work that required isolation, precision, and complete control. It suited him. The colonel turned Liberty homeward as the first stars appeared overhead. Below, lanterns flickered to life at the main house, and stables small defiances against the coming night. Harlan's gaze lingered on the eastern horizon, where something intuition born from decades in hostile territory told him change was coming. "Come on, boy," he said to Liberty. "Let's get back before Parker starts worrying." The horse snorted as if to say the old scout worried too much anyway, and began the descent. Parker waited at the corral, pipe clenched between yellowed teeth, his weathered face a roadmap of past campaigns. At 70, he moved slower than in his scout days, but his eyes remained sharp as a hawk's. "You're out late, Colonel," he remarked, taking Liberty's reins. "Just checking the eastern approach," Harlan replied, dismounting with a stiffness he'd never acknowledge. "Storm coming." Parker nodded, understanding that Harlan spoke of more than weather. 20 years together had taught them the economy of words. "The boy's been looking for you," Parker said, leading Liberty toward the stable. "Something about that new stallion Thunderhead. Won't take feed from anyone but you." Harlan grunted. "Where is he now?" "Kitchen. Miss Abigail's feeding him again." A ghost of a smile crossed Harlan's face. "She'll make him soft." "Boy could use some softness," Parker replied quietly. "World's hard enough." Harlan made no response. They both knew the truth of it. The main house stood apart from the other buildings, a solid two-story structure of stone and timber that resembled a frontier fort more than a home. No decorative touches softened its appearance. No woman's hand had shaped its stark utility in the decades since Martha's passing. As Harlan approached, the front door opened. Benji stood framed in the lamplight, a slight figure of 12 years with copper skin and dark eyes that had seen too much. The Jicarilla Apache boy had come to them 3 years ago, the sole survivor of a raid that had left his family dead. Harlan had found him hiding beneath the bodies of his kin, silent and wide-eyed. The colonel had brought him home, telling himself it was temporary, just until the Indian agent came. But days became weeks, and weeks became months, and somehow the boy had remained. Neither spoke much of the arrangement. Words were unnecessary luxuries in Harlan's world. "Colonel," Benji acknowledged, stepping aside. Harlan nodded as he passed. "Heard Thunderhead's giving you trouble. Won't eat for 3 days now," the boy reported, falling into step beside him. "Tried everything Parker showed me." "Some horses answer only to one master," Harlan said. "We'll see to him after supper." The kitchen smelled of cornbread and beans, simple fare, prepared by Abigail, the aging black woman who had followed Harlan from post to post during his military years and refused to leave when he'd been discharged. Like Parker, she was part of the strange family that had formed around the colonel, bound by loyalty rather than blood. "You're late," she said without looking up from the stove. "Food's nearly cold." "My apologies, Miss Abigail," Harlan replied with the formal courtesy he'd never abandoned. She waved away his words. "Sit. Eat. You're too thin." It was an old ritual between them, comfortable in its familiarity. Harlan took his place at the head of the long table, a relic from when the ranch had employed more hands. Now just 4 places were set his own, Parker's, Benji's, and Joseph Ridge's, though the latter's chair remained empty tonight. "Ridge still out?" Harlan asked, accepting a plate from Abigail. "Went to town for supplies," Parker answered, entering and taking his seat. "Said he'd be back by morning." Harlan nodded, hiding his unease. Joseph Ridge was his most trusted lieutenant, a former cavalry officer who had served under him at Fort Laramie. The man was meticulous, precise, and utterly reliable. If he said morning, he meant dawn, not noon. They ate in the comfortable silence of people accustomed to each other's presence. Only the occasional clink of cutlery against plates disturbed the quiet. Through the window, Harlan could see the stable lanterns glowing steadily. All was secure, all in its place. Yet something cold settled in his stomach that had nothing to do with Abigail's cooking. Night deepened. The ranch grew still, save for the occasional whicker of horses and the steady tread of the night watchman, old Thompson, a one-armed veteran who had nowhere else to go, and whom Harlan had taken in out of a sense of duty more than charity. In his Spartan bedroom, Harlan sat at a small desk, a single lamp illuminating the leather-bound journal before him. Each night for 10 years, he'd recorded the day's events, horses trained, supplies, ordered weather conditions, the practical details of ranch management. What he never wrote were the dreams. They came nightly, as predictable as sunset, the screams of women and children, the smoke from burning teepees, the metallic scent of blood on frozen ground. Sand Creek, the day that had defined him, though his name appeared in no official reports. The day he had watched American soldiers slaughter Cheyenne and Arapaho families who had been promised peace. The day he had tried too late to stop the madness. The day his commanding officer had ensured his protests never reached Washington. Harlan closed the journal and extinguished the lamp. Darkness enveloped him, familiar and almost welcome. He didn't fear the night. He feared what morning might bring. He was removing his boots when the first shot came, a distant crack that might have been mistaken for a branch breaking. Harlan froze, head tilted, listening. 10 seconds passed. 20. Then the second shot, unmistakable this time. Harlan moved with the efficiency of long training. Boots back on. Gun belt secured. Winchester rifle from its place above the bed. He was halfway down the stairs when Benji appeared below, eyes wide but hands steady on the shotgun Parker had taught him to use. "Eastern stable," the boy said. Thompson was on watch. No need to ask if the old watchman had fired the shots. Thompson couldn't handle a rifle with his one arm. He carried only a revolver and a whistle for alarm. "Wake Parker," Harlan ordered. "Then stay with Miss Abigail in the cellar. Bar the door." The boy hesitated, clearly wanting to join the defense, but training won out. He nodded once and disappeared toward the back of the house where Parker slept. Outside, the night had turned cloudy, the stars obscured by gathering storm clouds. Harlan moved through shadow, his footfalls silent on the packed earth. The eastern stable, the smallest of 3, housed the newest acquisitions, horses not yet fully trained, including Thunderhead, the magnificent black stallion he'd purchased at considerable expense from a breeder in Kentucky. As Harlan approached, a flicker of movement caught his eye, a human shape slipping between buildings. He raised the Winchester but held his fire. In the darkness, it could be Thompson, wounded but mobile. The stable door stood partially open, a sliver of deeper black against the dark wooden walls. No lantern light showed from within. Harlan circled wide, approaching from the blind side, where a small door led to the feed storage. As he reached for the latch, a horse screamed from inside, the unmistakable cry of an animal in pain or terror. Rage flared hot in Harlan's chest. In one fluid motion, he pushed open the door and entered, rifle raised. The smell hit him, first blood and gunpowder. His eyes adjusted to the darkness, made out shapes in the gloom. Stalls kicked open, hay scattered. Then movement, a man crouching near Thunderhead's stall working at something. "Stand and identify yourself," Harlan commanded, his voice cutting through the darkness. The figure spun, raising what appeared to be a pistol. Harlan fired without hesitation. The Winchester's report was deafening in the enclosed space. The man dropped a startled cry, dying in his throat. Silence fell, broken only by the nervous shuffling of frightened horses. Harlan advanced cautiously, rifle trained on the fallen figure. From outside came the sound of running feet, Parker moving to support him. "Colonel?" The old scout's voice carried from the main door. "One down," Harlan replied. "Check the perimeter." As Parker's footsteps receded, Harlan knelt beside the man he'd shot. A stranger, bearded and dirty, dressed in the nondescript clothing of a drifter or outlaw. The bullet had taken him high in the chest. He wouldn't survive long. "Who sent you?" Harlan demanded. The man's eyes widened, recognition flickering in their depths. "Harlan." Blood bubbled at his lips. "He said you'd be here." "Who said?" But the man's eyes had already gone vacant, staring at nothing. Harlan cursed under his breath and rose, turning his attention to the stalls. 3 were empty. Thunderhead remained agitated but unharmed. But Liberty's stall, which should have been in the main stable, stood open, the aging warhorse nowhere to be seen. Cold dread settled in Harlan's stomach. He strode to the main door, scanning the yard. No sign of the horse nor of Thompson. A whistle cut through the night, 3 short blasts, Parker's signal. Harlan moved toward it, finding the old scout kneeling beside a crumpled form near the corral. "Thompson?" Harlan asked, though he already knew. Parker nodded grimly. "Shot twice. No chance." The old watchman lay face up, eyes staring at the clouded sky, a dark stain spreading across his chest. His revolver remained in its holster. He'd never had a chance to draw. "Horses?" Harlan asked. 3 missing by my count," Parker replied. "Plus Liberty. Found signs of at least 6 men. Professionals moving light. Raiders don't target specific horses." Harlan said, the cold feeling deepening. "They'd have taken all or none." "Unless they knew which ones to take," Parker agreed. "Colonel, this wasn't random." A crack of lightning illuminated the scene, followed by the low rumble of thunder. The storm was approaching, and with it would come rain to wash away tracks. "Gather what men we have," Harlan ordered. "We ride within the hour." Parker's weathered face creased with concern. "Rain's coming. Trail will be cold by morning." "Then we don't wait for morning." A soft whicker drew their attention. From the darkness beyond the corral, a horse approached, limping badly, head hanging low. Liberty. The black stallion's flank was matted with blood, and as he came closer, Harlan could see the reason for his distress, a bullet graze along his hindquarter. "They shot him," Harlan said, his voice dangerously quiet. Parker watched as the colonel approached the wounded horse, murmuring gentle reassurances. Man and beast had been through too much together to be separated by mere outlaws. "They'll regret that," Parker said, knowing it to be true. 10 miles east, Wade Coyote Granger and his men pushed the stolen horses hard through the gathering storm. Rain had begun to fall, fat drops that promised a deluge to come. Perfect weather for covering their tracks, though Granger had taken precautions, anyway, splitting the party, laying false trails, keeping to rocky ground where possible. At 45, Granger was lean and hard as jerky, his face weathered by sun and wind, his body a collection of old scars and poorly set bones. A cavalry sergeant once before the world had shown him the true meaning of loyalty. Now he commanded a different sort of troop, 5 men as damaged and dangerous as himself. "Ease up on the black," he called to Hicks, who was struggling with one of the stolen horses. "Worth more alive than dead." Hicks, a bear of a man with a perpetual scowl, yanked cruelly on the reins. Damn beast tried to take my arm off. Then you should have kept your arm away from his teeth, Granger replied without sympathy. Those are war-trained animals, not plow horses. They had targeted Harlan's ranch specifically for that reason. Military-grade horses brought premium prices south of the border, where revolutions seemed to spark with each changing season. The Mexican general who had commissioned this raid had been explicit: bring the best or don't come back. But that was only half the truth. The other half rode in Granger's breast pocket, a folded document that had cost more than horses ever could. Lightning forked across the sky, momentarily turning night to harsh day. In that flash, Granger caught the expression on Santiago's face, the youngest of his crew, barely 20, and already hard as flint. "Something on your mind, boy?" Granger asked when darkness returned. Santiago hesitated. "Just wondering why we didn't hit the main stable. Better horses there." "Better security, too," Granger replied. "Besides, we got what we came for." Not entirely true, but the men didn't need to know that. They thought this was about money, simple, clean, the kind of job they'd pulled a dozen times before. They didn't know about the letter nor the man who had sent it. They didn't know about Sand Creek or what Harlan had done and failed to do there. They certainly didn't know about the larger game being played. "Harlan will come after us," said Curtis, the oldest of the crew apart from Granger himself. Like Wade, he'd seen war the real kind, not the sanitized version in newspaper accounts. "Counting on it," Granger replied. Curtis studied him through the rain. "You want him to follow—" "Want?" Granger laughed, a sound devoid of humor. "No, but he will. The colonel was always predictable that way. Man lives by a code even when the world's forgotten what honor means." "If you say so," Curtis muttered. "Still think we should have killed him when we had the chance." Granger shook his head. "Too easy. Some deaths need to be earned." "Shermanum." The words hung in the air between them, nearly drowned by the intensifying rain. Curtis didn't press further. He'd ridden with Granger long enough to recognize when the man was navigating by stars only he could see. They rode in silence after that, pushing deeper into the wilderness, the stolen horses struggling against exhaustion and fear. All except one, a young mare with a white blaze, who moved with surprising eagerness, as if freedom from Harlan's ranch was precisely what she'd wanted. "That one's taken to you," Curtis observed. Granger patted the mare's neck. "She knows what's coming, smarter than most humans that way." By midnight, they reached the rendezvous point, an abandoned mining camp tucked into a canyon where flash floods had once washed away both equipment and men. Nothing remained but a few collapsed structures and the rusting hulks of machinery long since stripped of anything valuable. "Make camp," Granger ordered. "Hicks first watch. Santiago secure the horses. Curtis signal fire small and sheltered. Don't want it seen from the ridges." As the men dispersed to their tasks, Granger found a relatively dry spot beneath an overhanging rock and extracted a bottle of whiskey from his saddlebag. The rain continued to fall, drumming against stone and earth nature's own funeral march. He took a long pull from the bottle, welcoming the burn. The other men thought he drank to forget. In truth, he drank to remember every slight, every betrayal, every promise broken. 15 years was a long time to nurture hatred, but Granger had tended his like a garden, watering it with whiskey and fertilizing it with bitter memories. From his pocket, he withdrew the letter that had set everything in motion. The paper had grown soft with repeated handling, the ink beginning to blur at the folds. The signature at the bottom, elegant, educated, belonged to a man Granger had never met, but whose money spent just fine, Harlan Jr. The colonel's son reaching out from his comfortable life in Washington to arrange his father's destruction. The irony wasn't lost on Granger. Family turning against family, a mirror of his own history with Harlan. Sergeant Wade Granger, trusted, reliable, expendable. Left behind enemy lines when the mission went sideways. Officially listed as killed in action, so the Army wouldn't have to mount a rescue. A convenient fiction that allowed Colonel Harlan to continue his illustrious career while Granger rotted in a Comanche camp for 2 years before escaping. The whiskey burned sweetly. Granger refolded the letter and tucked it away. Tomorrow would bring pursuit, the day after confrontation, and then at last accounting. Soon, he promised the night. Very soon. Dawn broke gray and sodden over Harlan's ranch. The rain had stopped, but heavy clouds promised more to come. In the yard, 5 mounted men waited while Parker secured the last of the provisions to his saddle. Harlan emerged from the main house, rifle in hand, dressed for hard riding. Despite the hour and circumstances, he appeared freshly shaved, his uniform-like clothing immaculate. Old habits died hard if they died at all. Benji followed, carrying a final sack of supplies. "Remember what I told you," Harlan said to the boy. "If we're not back in 10 days, take Miss Abigail and the strong box to Fort Stanton," Benji recited. "Ask for Captain Reynolds." Harlan nodded, satisfied. "And keep that shotgun loaded." The boy's expression remained solemn, but determination showed in the set of his jaw. "Yes, sir." As Parker took the supplies from Benji, Harlan mounted Liberty. The old war horse had been treated and bandaged, his wound deemed superficial enough to allow for riding. The stallion stood steady, sensing the importance of the moment. "Thompson," Harlan asked Parker quietly. "Buried proper," the scout replied. "Said words over him myself." Harlan nodded his thanks. Religious observances meant little to him now, but Thompson had been a believer. It mattered that things were done right. With a final glance at Benji and the ranch buildings, Harlan turned Liberty toward the east. The other riders fell in behind him, Parker and 3 ranch hands who had seen enough combat to be useful. Not a large force, but Harlan had achieved more with less during the war. They rode in silence, following the trail that remained despite the rain. Parker ranged ahead, stopping occasionally to study tracks or broken vegetation. The outlaws had been careful, but not careful enough. Here and there, signs remained. A horse's hoof had slipped in mud. A branch had been broken at man height, a cigarette butt discarded carelessly. By mid-morning, they reached a stream swollen with rainwater. Parker dismounted, scanning the muddy banks. "Trail splits here," he reported. 3 directions. Harlan studied the landscape. A classic diversion tactic, one he'd employed himself during cavalry days. "How many horses in each group?" Parker pointed west. 2 riders, no extra mounts." Then south. "Single rider, moving fast." Finally east. "Main party, 4 or 5 men plus our horses." "East then," Harlan decided. "They'll rendezvous later." They forded the stream and continued the land, gradually changing from rolling plains to broken country, a landscape of sudden ravines and wind-carved rock formations. Good ambush territory. Harlan signaled for the men to spread out, reducing the target they presented. An hour later, Parker raised his hand for a halt. The old scout had frozen, head tilted, as if listening. Harlan immediately reined in Liberty, signaling the others to do likewise. Silence stretched, broken only by the occasional snort of a horse or creak of saddle leather. Then Harlan heard it too, the distant crack of a rifle shot, followed by several more in quick succession. "Ridge," one of the hands suggested. Harlan shook his head. "Too many shots." Joseph Ridge was too experienced to waste ammunition in a prolonged firefight. If he'd encountered the outlaws, he would have either withdrawn to report or engaged with surgical precision. "Could be they ran into trouble of their own," Parker suggested. "Apache, maybe." "Or a trap," Harlan countered. "We approach with caution." They advanced more slowly now, using the terrain for cover. The gunfire had ceased, but something else hung in the air, the acrid scent of burning wood. As they crested a low rise, the source became apparent, a thin column of smoke rising from a canyon ahead. Parker produced a battered spyglass and surveyed the scene. "Camp," he reported. "Recently abandoned. Looks like they left in a hurry, cook fire still burning." "Horses?" Harlan asked. "None visible." Parker continued to scan. "Wait. Body on the ground. Just one that I can see." Harlan considered their options. If this was an ambush, the high ground surrounding the canyon would be the kill zone. But the smoking fire suggested genuine abandonment. No ambusher would leave such an obvious signal. "You 3 hold this position," he ordered the ranch hands. "Cover us. Parker with me." They approached the canyon, cautiously, rifles ready. As they neared the abandoned camp, details emerged: scattered supplies, a pot of beans still hanging over the smoldering firebed rolls left unfurled. Signs of a hasty departure. The body lay face down near what appeared to be a picket line for horses. A man in nondescript clothing, a pistol still clutched in his lifeless hand. Harlan rolled him over with the toe of his boot. "Know him?" Parker asked. Harlan studied the dead man's features. Unremarkable save for the exit wound that had removed most of his left cheek. No, but his weapon might tell us something. He crouched and prized the pistol from stiffening fingers. Army Colt well maintained, but bearing no identifying marks. The ammunition, however, was distinctive custom loads with brass casings, polished to a mirror shine. Granger, Harlan said, a cold certainty settling over him. He always did prefer pretty bullets. Parker's expression darkened. Wade Granger, the sergeant from... Yes. Harlan cut him off, not wanting to revisit that particular history. Question is, what's he doing stealing my horses? Man never cared about money. Revenge, maybe, Parker suggested. You did leave him for dead. Under orders, Harlan replied, his tone making it clear the subject was closed. They searched the camp methodically, looking for anything that might indicate the outlaws' destination or purpose. Parker found a crumpled piece of paper tossed into the fire, but only partially burned. He extracted it carefully and smoothed it against his leg. Map, he said, examining the charred document. This region. Got markings on it, some kind of road. He squinted at faded writing along the bottom. Can't make out most of it. Just a name. Sand Creek. Harlan went very still. He extended his hand and Parker passed him the fragment without comment. The colonel studied it, his expression unreadable. But a muscle jumped in his jaw, the only sign of the emotions roiling beneath his controlled exterior. This isn't about horses, he said finally. What then? Harlan folded the paper carefully and tucked it into his shirt pocket. Someone's digging into the past. My past. Before Parker could respond, a shout came from the ridge where they'd left the ranch hands. One was waving urgently, pointing east. Harlan and Parker remounted quickly and rejoined them. Riders, the hand reported. Coming fast. 7, maybe 8 of them. Harlan raised his own spyglass. The approaching group was still distant, but something about their formation triggered recognition. Not outlaws. Cavalry or men who rode like cavalry. Hold your fire, he ordered. I know who they are. The riders approached at a gallop, only slowing when they were within 100 yards. Their leader raised his hand in greeting a tall man with a captain's bearing despite his civilian clothing. Joseph Ridge had returned and he wasn't alone. Ridge dismounted with the fluid grace of a lifetime horseman. At 38, he retained the physical prime that had made him a formidable cavalry officer before he'd followed Harlan into private life. His eyes, however, held a wariness that hadn't been there when he'd departed for town. Colonel, he greeted, removing his hat. Wasn't expecting to find you out here. Circumstances changed, Harlan replied, studying the men who accompanied Ridge. Hard cases, all of them, with the 1,000-yard stares of those who'd seen combat. You've been recruiting? Ridge nodded. Word came to town. Raid planned on your ranch. These men owed me favors. He gestured to the group. Might have been too late by the looks of things. Thompson's dead. 3 horses taken. Harlan's tone was matter-of-fact, betraying none of the rage that had driven him to immediate pursuit. Trail led here. Camp was abandoned when we arrived. Ridge surveyed the scene, his expression troubled. Raiders heading east. Appears so. Harlan studied his lieutenant's face. You're holding something back, Joseph. The younger man hesitated, glancing at the hired guns who waited at a respectful distance. Should speak privately, sir. They withdrew a short distance beyond earshot of the others. Parker remained with the main group, his watchful gaze never leaving the newcomers. Old habits died hard for him, too. What is it? Harlan asked once they were alone. Ridge removed an envelope from his coat. This came for you. Special courier from Santa Fe. He paused. It's from Washington. Harlan took the envelope. The handwriting on the front was painfully familiar, the precise, elegant script of his son. He broke the seal and extracted a single sheet of paper. As he read, his expression hardened until it resembled the stone formations surrounding them. Bad news, Ridge ventured. My son Harlan said, refolding the letter, informs me that an Army investigative committee is reopening the Sand Creek inquiry. New evidence has surfaced. He suggests I make myself available for questioning. After 15 years, Ridge sounded incredulous. Why now? Politics, Harlan replied bitterly. Junior has aspirations. A father with a questionable war record is inconvenient. But you weren't even officially there, Ridge protested. Your name's on no reports. Someone knows differently. Harlan's gaze drifted to the canyon where Granger's camp lay abandoned. And I believe our horse thieves are connected. Understanding dawned in Ridge's eyes. Granger. He was at Sand Creek. As my sergeant, yes. Harlan's voice had gone flat. I received orders to ensure no survivors remained to contradict the official account. Orders I refused to obey. And Granger was more amenable to following command. Harlan tucked his son's letter away. Later, when he was captured during the Comanche campaign, certain parties found it convenient to list him as killed in action rather than mount a rescue. Cleaner that way. Ridge absorbed this information silently. Like most who had served under Harlan, he knew fragments of the colonel's history, enough to respect the man, not enough to fully understand him. What now, sir? He asked finally. Harlan gazed eastward toward the distant horizon where Granger and his men had vanished with the stolen horses. We continue pursuit, but the objective has changed. This isn't about recovering property anymore. What then? Justice. Harlan said the word falling between them like a stone. Long overdue. The wind picked up, carrying with it the promise of more rain. Above them, turkey vultures circled lazily patient scavengers, awaiting their turn at the dead man in the canyon. Nature's cleanup crew, indifferent to human concerns of honor or vengeance. Harlan watched them for a moment, then turned back to where the men waited. The past, it seemed, was no longer content to remain buried. So be it. He had spent 15 years preparing for this reckoning, though he hadn't known that was what he was doing. Tell the men to rest the horses, he ordered Ridge. We ride again in 1 hour. Night found them camped in a sheltered arroyo, having followed Granger's trail until darkness made tracking impossible. Parker had estimated they were 6 hours behind the Outlaws, close enough to maintain pursuit, far enough to avoid an ambush. Harlan sat apart from the others, examining the charred map fragment by firelight. What remained showed portions of the New Mexico territory with a route marked in faded ink. The trail led east, then north into Colorado, toward the site of the Sand Creek Massacre. It made a certain terrible sense. Granger seeking to expose what had happened there, using stolen horses as bait to draw Harlan into the open. But why now, after 15 years? The answer lay in his son's letter. The timing was too perfect to be coincidence. Someone was orchestrating events from afar, pulling strings to force confrontations and revelations. Coffee, Colonel. Harlan looked up to find Ridge standing nearby, offering a tin cup. He accepted with a nod of thanks. Thinking about Sand Creek? Ridge asked, settling beside him. Among other things, Harlan sipped the bitter brew. Strange business coming back like this. Ridge studied the older man's profile in the firelight. You never talk about it. Some things resist telling. Harlan's gaze remained fixed on the map. 300 dead, mostly women and children. Bodies mutilated afterward, parts taken as trophies. His voice had gone clinical, as if reciting a report. I arrived late, saw the aftermath, filed a protest that mysteriously never reached Washington. And Granger was following orders. Harlan's expression hardened. Not mine. They sat in silence for a time, each man absorbed in his thoughts. Finally, Ridge spoke again. What will you do when we catch him? Depends on what he wants, Harlan replied. If it's just revenge, that's simple enough. If he's working for someone else. He let the thought hang unfinished. Across the camp, Parker approached, moving with the careful deliberation of a man whose joints protested every step. Colonel, you'll want to see this. He held out a small object, something he'd found while scouting the area. Harlan took it, turning it over in his palm. A horseshoe nail, but not the standard kind. This one was brass with a distinctive head. Custom work, Harlan murmured. For officers' mounts. He looked up sharply. Where? Under a rock by the creek, Parker said, wedged in deliberate-like. Show me. They followed the old scout to a small creek that cut through the arroyo. Near the water's edge, a flat stone had been propped against a larger boulder. Parker pointed to the small space beneath. Nail was here, and this. He produced a folded piece of paper, protected from the elements by its placement. Didn't open it. Figured it was for you. Harlan unfolded the paper carefully. A message written in a precise hand he didn't recognize Colonel Harlan. The horses were necessary to gain your attention. My apologies for the crude method. What I truly seek is justice for Sand Creek. I have documentation that will interest you, evidence that may change the official record. Follow the markers. Come alone to Stone Table Mesa at midday tomorrow if you wish to see it. No harm will come to you under flag of truce. An interested party, no signature. Harlan reread the note, his expression giving nothing away. Trap, Ridge asked. Almost certainly, Harlan replied, though not necessarily Granger's. This handwriting isn't his. You're not considering going, Ridge said, alarm evident in his voice. I'm considering all options. Harlan folded the note and tucked it away. Stone Table is 4 hours ride northeast. Exposed position. Easy to defend, easier to ambush. All the more reason not to go alone, Parker interjected. Harlan studied both men, loyal companions who had stood with him through years of self-imposed exile. I don't intend to, but whoever wrote this believes I will, and that gives us an advantage. Understanding dawned in Ridge's eyes. You want them to think you're coming alone. While you and the men circle wide and approach from the west, Harlan confirmed. High ground there. Good rifle positions. Parker nodded slowly. Could work, assuming they don't have men watching our camp. They likely do, Harlan said, which is why the performance needs to be convincing. I'll leave at dawn, apparently alone. You follow 2 hours later, split into small groups. The plan took shape quickly, each man contributing from his military experience. By the time they rejoined the main camp, all details had been arranged. Harlan would ride to the meeting as requested, but he would not be unprotected. Later, as the camp settled into uneasy sleep, Harlan remained awake, staring into the dying embers of the fire. The note troubled him more than he had let on. Not the potential trap he had survived worse, but the mention of documentation. Evidence about Sand Creek. Few knew the full truth of what had happened there, and fewer still lived to speak of it. The official record, sanitized and incomplete, named Colonel John Chivington as the officer in charge, a man whose brutality had eventually become too extreme even for a government accustomed to Indian killing. Harlan's name appeared nowhere in those documents, his presence erased by the same powers that had buried his protests. If evidence existed that placed him at the scene, it could only have come from someone who was there, someone who had kept records, someone with a reason to expose the truth now after all these years. Liberty whickered softly from where the horses were picketed, sensing his master's disquiet. Harlan rose and went to him, stroking the stallion's neck with a gentleness few ever witnessed. Rest easy, old friend, he murmured. Tomorrow we face ghosts. The horse snorted, steam rising from his nostrils in the cool night air. Perhaps Harlan reflected Liberty understood better than most. The stallion had carried him through enough battles to recognize the scent of one approaching. Overhead stars wheeled in their ancient patterns, indifferent to human concerns. Harlan studied them for a time, finding the North Star, as he had been taught long ago by a Cheyenne scout, whose name he still remembered, Black Kettle. The same Black Kettle who had died at Sand Creek, despite flying both American and white flags of peace over his village. Some debts could never be repaid, some sins never absolved. But tomorrow, perhaps, truth might finally have its day. With that cold comfort, Harlan returned to his bedroll and closed his eyes, not expecting sleep, but needing to rest nonetheless. Dawn would come soon enough, and with it the next chapter in a story 15 years in the writing. Somewhere in the darkness beyond their camp, a coyote howled long and lonesome. Whether warning or welcome, Harlan couldn't say. But he knew with a certainty born of decades on the frontier that blood would water the earth before this journey ended. His blood, or Granger's, or both. The scales of justice demanded no less. Dawn arrived in shades of amber and crimson, the sun rising through bands of dust suspended in the still air. Harlan stood alone at the edge of camp, watching the light creep across the landscape, transforming shadows into solid forms. Behind him, men stirred, quiet voices discussing the coming day. They knew the plan, understood their roles. Veterans, all they required little instruction beyond the initial briefing. Liberty stood saddled, nearby, hooves pawing impatiently at the earth. The wound on his flank had begun to scab over, no longer bleeding, but certainly painful. Like his master, the stallion understood the concept of carrying on despite injury. Heading out. Parker approached, coffee tin in hand. The old scout's movements were stiff with night chill, but his eyes remained alert. Harlan accepted the offered coffee. First light is agreed. You'll follow in 2 hours. Parker nodded. Ridge is arranging the groups now. 3 approaches to the mesa. No one will spot us until it's too late. Remember observation only, Harlan cautioned. No shots unless I signal or they move against me. And if it's a trap, then spring it on our terms. They stood in silence as the light strengthened, drinking coffee and contemplating the day ahead. Decades of friendship had taught them the value of quiet moments before action. Words couldn't change what was coming, and both had seen enough campaigns to know that plans rarely survived first contact with the enemy. Colonel, Parker said finally, about Sand Creek. Not now. Harlan cut him off, his voice gentle but firm. After. The old scout understood. Some conversations were best postponed until survival was assured. He nodded and clapped Harlan once on the shoulder, a rare physical gesture between them, before returning to the camp. Harlan finished his coffee and mounted Liberty. The stallion tensed beneath him, sensing his rider's focus. Without looking back, the colonel urged his mount forward, leaving the safety of the camp for the exposed terrain beyond. The meeting at Stone Table Mesa awaited, and with it perhaps answers to questions 15 years in the asking. Stone Table Mesa rose from the plain like the ruins of some ancient civilization, its flat top supported by weathered columns of red sandstone. Named by early Spanish explorers for its resemblance to a massive altar, it had once been a sacred site for the native peoples who had inhabited these lands before being driven away by settlers and soldiers. Now it stood as a silent witness to the changing tides of human affairs, indifferent to the dramas played out in its shadow. Harlan approached from the East Liberty, moving at a steady walk. He had arrived early, deliberately so. It gave him time to study the terrain, to look for signs of ambush or deception. The mesa itself offered few hiding places on its exposed top, but the surrounding ravines and rock formations provided ample cover for watching eyes. As he drew closer, movement caught his attention, a flash of white against the red stone. A flag of truce hanging limp in the still air. Beside it, a solitary figure waited seated on what appeared to be a fallen column. Harlan stopped Liberty 100 yards out, close enough to see, but far enough to react if shots came. He raised his spyglass and studied the figure. Not Granger. This man was younger, slighter, dressed in the clean, practical clothing of someone who spent more time in offices than on the trail. As Harlan watched, the man raised his own field glasses, studying the colonel in return. Then he lifted a hand in greeting. An invitation. Harlan lowered his glass and urged Liberty forward, one hand resting near his holstered revolver. The stallion moved cautiously, ears pricked forward, alert for danger. As they reached the base of the mesa, a narrow trail became visible, switching back and forth up the steep face. Harlan guided Liberty onto it, the horse's hooves dislodging small cascades of pebbles that clattered down the slope. The sound would announce his approach to anyone waiting above an unavoidable risk. The top of the mesa was smaller than it appeared, from a distance perhaps 100 feet across at its widest point. Wind and rain had carved shallow basins into the stone, where rainwater collected and desert plants took tenuous hold. In the center where the flagpole had been planted, a crude camp had been established, a small tent, a cold fire ring, and several crates arranged as makeshift furniture. The man rose as Harlan crested the edge of the mesa. Up close, he appeared to be in his early 30s with features that suggested education and comfort rather than the hardscrabble existence of the frontier. His hands, when he raised them to show they were empty, bore no calluses. "Colonel Harlan," he called. "Thank you for coming. Alone as requested." Harlan remained mounted, giving him the height advantage. "You have me at a disadvantage, sir." "Ah, my name wouldn't mean anything to you," the man replied. "I represent interested parties." "The sort of parties who hire men to steal horses?" A flicker of discomfort crossed the man's face. "A regrettable necessity. I needed to ensure your cooperation, and my colleagues required convincing methods." "Your colleagues," Harlan repeated. "You mean Granger?" "Among others. Please, Colonel, dismount and join me. I've prepared coffee, and I have information I believe you'll find valuable." Harlan studied the man in the camp. No visible weapons beyond a small hunting knife, No obvious places for others to hide. The flag of truce at least appeared genuine. After a moment's consideration, he swung down from Liberty's back, though he kept hold of the reins. "Coffee I'll accept," he said. "Information I'll judge for myself." The man gestured to one of the crate seats. "Of course. My name is Elliot, by the way. Dr. Elliot James." "Shidwanawar, doctor of what?" Harlan asked, remaining standing. "History." James replied, moving to a small spirit stove where a pot bubbled. "Specifically, the history of the Western conflicts. I've been researching the Sand Creek Massacre for my latest work." The word hung in the air between them. Massacre, not battle, not engagement. The distinction was significant and deliberately chosen. "Many have written about Sand Creek," Harlan said carefully. "What makes your research different?" James poured coffee into 2 tin cups and offered one to the colonel. "I've discovered documents that were supposedly destroyed. Personal journals, military correspondence." He paused. "Witness testimonies that never reached Washington." Harlan accepted the coffee but made no move to drink it. "And these documents mention me." "They do." James returned to his seat. "They place you at Sand Creek despite official records stating you were at Fort Lyon during the engagement. They detail your attempt to stop the killing once it began, and they describe the systematic effort to ensure your protests never reach the proper authorities." "If such documents exist," Harlan said, "they would be classified. Accessing them would constitute a federal offense." James smiled thinly. "Hence my cautious approach. But I assure you, Colonel, they exist, and I'm not the only one who knows about them." Harlan sipped his coffee, using the moment to scan the horizon. The sun had risen higher, casting shorter shadows. In those shadows, Parker and Ridge's men would be moving into position, preparing to intervene if necessary. He returned his attention to James. "You mentioned Granger. What's his role in this?" "Sergeant Granger has his own reasons for involvement," James replied. "Revenge primarily. But he's also provided valuable first-hand accounts of what occurred at Sand Creek. Accounts that corroborate the documents I've found." "Oh, want to show." "Granger wasn't with me that day," Harlan said sharply. "He was with Chivington." "Precisely." James leaned forward. "He witnessed your arrival, your attempt to intervene, and the subsequent arrangement to remove you from the official record, both to protect you and to silence your objections to what happened." Harlan set down his coffee untouched after the first sip. "What exactly do you want from me, Dr. James?" "Your testimony." James' expression grew earnest. "A first-hand account from a respected military officer would lend tremendous weight to my work. It could force a re-examination of not just Sand Creek, but the entire policy toward the Plains tribes during that period." "After 15 years, Harlan's tone was skeptical. "The government has no interest in revisiting its sins, Doctor, especially not when those sins were deliberate policy." "Perhaps not voluntarily," James conceded, "but public opinion is a powerful force. My book with your contribution could generate enough outrage to compel action. Or it could be quietly suppressed, and both of us could meet with unfortunate accidents." Harlan's gaze hardened. "You're naive if you think this is merely academic." James's confidence faltered for the first time. "I'm aware of the risks, but the truth, Harlan interrupted, "is rarely simple and never without cost." He stood making a show of checking the sun's position. "I need time to consider your proposal." "Time is precisely what we don't have," James said urgently. "There are others moving to prevent this information from becoming public. Powerful interests in Washington who would prefer the Sand Creek matter remain closed. Such as, I don't have names, but they've sent agents, men who have already attempted to acquire my research through less scholarly means." Harlan nodded slowly as if this confirmed a suspicion. "And where is your research now?" "Safe," James assured him. "Hidden where only I can retrieve it." "And Granger, where is he?" "Nearby." James gestured vaguely eastward. "With the horses, he insisted on keeping them as insurance." "Against what?" "Your cooperation primarily. He doesn't trust you, Colonel, with good reason from his perspective." Harlan's expression remained neutral, but inwardly he calculated distances and possibilities. If Granger was nearby with the horses, Parker's men might already have spotted him. The situation was more complex than a simple meeting. "I'll need proof," he said finally, "of these documents you claim to have." James reached into his jacket movements, deliberate to avoid appearing threatening. He withdrew a folded paper and held it out. "This is a copy of part of your own after-action report, the one that never reached Washington." Harlan took the paper and unfolded it. The handwriting was unmistakably his own precise military-trained penmanship, detailing the events at Sand Creek in clinical language that nonetheless conveyed horror at what he had witnessed. He remembered writing these words, believing they would reach General Curtis and result in courts-martial for those responsible. Instead, they had vanished into the machinery of bureaucratic burial. "Where did you get this?" he asked, his voice dangerously quiet. "From the personal papers of General Curtis," James replied. "His family donated them to the University of Pennsylvania archives after his death. Most researchers focus on his Civil War correspondence. I was more thorough." Harlan refolded the paper and tucked it into his shirt pocket. "This proves nothing except that you have access to my report. It doesn't substantiate your other claims." "No," James agreed, "but it should convince you that I'm genuine in my research. The rest of the evidence I can show you, but not here. You'll need to come with me to—" A gunshot cracked across the mesa top, the sound amplified by the surrounding stone. James jerked backward, a look of surprise crossing his face as a red stain blossomed on his shirt front. He opened his mouth to speak, but only a wet cough emerged. Harlan reacted instantly, diving for cover behind a rock formation and drawing his revolver in one fluid motion. Liberty, trained for combat, didn't bolt, but instead moved to the edge of the mesa, away from the line of fire. A second shot kicked up stone dust near Harlan's position. The angle suggested a shooter on the far side of the mesa, opposite from where Parker and Ridge's men would be positioned. Someone else had been watching the meeting. James lay crumpled by the flagpole, still moving, but clearly badly wounded. The white truce flag above him fluttered as a breeze finally stirred the hot air. Harlan assessed his options. The mesa top offered minimal cover. The trail down was exposed, making him an easy target if he attempted to retreat. His best chance was to eliminate the shooter and then get James to safety, assuming the historian hadn't been killed outright. A third shot came closer this time. The shooter was adjusting walking rounds toward Harlan's position. Good technique. Military training. This was no random attack. Harlan waited for the fourth shot, then used the moment after to pivot around his cover and fire twice in the direction of the shooter. He didn't expect to hit anything. The distance was too great for a revolver, but it might force the attacker to seek better cover, buying precious seconds. "Parker!" he shouted, hoping the old scout was close enough to hear. "Shooter on the north rim." Whether his call was heard remained unclear, but something else happened. A fusillade of shots erupted from the eastern approach to the mesa, the direction James had indicated Granger might be. Not aimed at Harlan, but apparently engaged with others. Parker's men, perhaps, or a third group entirely. The battlefield had just expanded dramatically, and Harlan found himself caught in the middle with an injured civilian and limited cover. It was a scenario he'd faced before, though usually with more men at his command. The principles remained the same: secure the wounded, identify threats, establish control. Keeping low, he moved toward James, using what cover the mesa top provided. The historian lay still now, blood pooling beneath him. As Harlan reached him, he noted the entry wound high in the chest, likely lung. Survivable with immediate medical attention, but not here, not now. James's eyes fluttered open as Harlan checked for a pulse. "Colonel," he gasped, blood bubbling at his lips. "The documents? Canyon. 3 miles east. Stone Cairn. Save your strength," Harlan advised, tearing a strip from James's own shirt to fashion a pressure bandage. "We need to get you down from here." "No time," James wheezed. "They're coming. For everything. Not just papers. The gold." "What gold?" But James's eyes had rolled back, consciousness fleeing as his body fought to cope with the trauma. Harlan secured the makeshift bandage as best he could, then surveyed his surroundings again. The shooter on the north rim had gone silent, either repositioning or neutralized by Parker's men. The gunfire to the east continued sporadically, suggesting a running fight rather than a concentrated engagement. A sharp whistle came from the western edge of the mesa, 3 notes in a pattern Harlan recognized. Parker signaling that he was approaching. Harlan responded with a single low whistle, indicating caution was still needed. Moments later, the old scout appeared, rifle in hand, using the stone formations for cover as he advanced. "Colonel," he called softly, "situation's gone to hell. Ridge spotted Granger's men to the east, but there's another group, professional types. They hit the rendezvous where the horses were being kept. Casualties. One of ours wounded, not serious. At least 2 of Granger's men down. The professionals took losses too, but they've pulled back for now." Harlan nodded toward James. "Historian. Gut shot. Claims to have documents about Sand Creek. Also mentioned gold." Parker frowned. "Gold. There's an old story about a payroll wagon that went missing around that time. Army funds for the Colorado Volunteers. Never found. Could be connected," Harlan mused, "or could be delirium from the wound. Either way, we need to get him stable enough to transport." "Trail down the backside is clear," Parker reported. "Ridge has men covering it. Can have a wagon here in an hour." "He doesn't have an hour," Harlan said grimly, checking James's pulse again. It was weaker, threading beneath his fingertips. "And we can't stay exposed up here." Its decision crystallized. "Get Liberty. We'll take him down on horseback, then find somewhere defensible to regroup." As Parker moved to retrieve the stallion, Harlan searched James's pockets, looking for anything that might identify the professional types who had attacked. He found little: a pocket watch, a train ticket stub from Santa Fe, and a small notebook filled with cramped writing. He took the notebook, suspecting it might contain information about the documents James had mentioned. By the time Parker returned with Liberty, James's breathing had grown more labored, the front of his shirt now completely soaked with blood, despite the pressure bandage. They managed to get him draped across the saddle, secured with belts to prevent him from falling during the descent. "I'll lead Liberty down," Harlan said. "You cover our retreat." "Ahorno." Parker nodded, positioning himself to watch for any signs of the shooter, as Harlan began the careful process of guiding the heavily burdened horse down the narrow trail. Liberty moved with the sureness of long experience, placing each hoof deliberately, despite the awkward weight on his back. They were halfway down when a shot rang out, the bullet striking stone near Harlan's head. Parker returned fire immediately, 3 quick rounds that forced the unseen shooter back into cover. The old scout had always been an excellent marksman, even at distances that challenged younger eyes. "Move faster," Parker called. "I'll hold them." Harlan didn't waste breath arguing. He urged Liberty to a quicker pace, knowing the risk of a misstep increased but accepting it as necessary. Behind him, Parker maintained a steady fire, not trying to hit the distant target, but keeping the shooter's head down through sheer volume. When they reached the bottom, Ridge was waiting with 2 other men, all mounted and ready. "Thompson's Gulch," he suggested without preamble. "Defensible. Water source. Not far." Harlan nodded. "Lead the way. Parker will join us when he can." They rode east away from the mesa, keeping to the low ground where rocks and scattered vegetation provided some concealment. James, still draped across Liberty's saddle, had fallen unconscious, his breathing shallow and irregular. Harlan knew the man's chances were slim, but abandoning a wounded civilian wasn't an option he would consider. Thompson's Gulch appeared after 20 minutes of hard riding, a narrow ravine cut into the earth by centuries of seasonal floods. Steep walls rose on 3 sides, while the entrance could be easily defended by a small force. A spring bubbled from the rock face at the rear, feeding a small pool before disappearing underground again. "Get James settled," Harlan ordered as they entered the gulch. "Defensive positions at the entrance. And someone stay with the horses, they'll need water after that run." The men moved with practiced efficiency, establishing a perimeter, while Ridge helped Harlan lower James from Liberty's back. They laid him on a blanket in the shade of an overhanging rock where Harlan could better examine the wound. "Bad?" Ridge asked, though the answer was written in the ashen color of James's face. "Through and through," Harlan replied. "Lung, probably. Blood loss is severe." "Doesn't make sense," Ridge said, keeping his voice low. "Why shoot him if he had valuable information?" "Maybe they already got what they needed," Harlan suggested. "Or maybe they thought he'd already passed it to me." Ridge nodded thoughtfully. "What did he tell you?" "Enough to know this is bigger than stolen horses." Harlan extracted the notebook he'd taken from James. "He claimed to have documents about Sand Creek, witness testimonies that never reached Washington, My own after-action report. After 15 years, why now? History has a way of resurfacing when least convenient, Harlan said grimly. He mentioned a location canyon 3 miles east marked by a stone cairn. Said that's where his research is hidden. Ridge's expression grew troubled. Could be a trap. Almost certainly is, Harlan agreed. But if those documents exist, they're too dangerous to leave unsecured, particularly if others are already searching for them. A commotion at the gulch entrance interrupted their conversation. Parker had arrived accompanied by one of Ridge's hired guns. The old scout dismounted stiffly, his face drawn with exertion. Lost them in the rocks, he reported, approaching Harlan. Professional work, though, not Granger's style. You recognize them? Parker shook his head. Never saw faces, but the tactics, moving in pairs, covering fire, flanking maneuvers. Military training recent. He glanced at James. How's he doing? Dying, Harlan said bluntly. But he gave us a lead before he was hit. His research is supposedly hidden in a canyon east of here. Any canyon in particular? Parker asked dryly. Territory's full of them. He said a stone cairn would mark the spot. Parker considered this. Could be Rattlesnake Canyon, 3, maybe 4 miles east of the mesa. Deep cut, hard to find unless you know where to look. You know it. Scouted through there during the Apache troubles. Parker confirmed. Nasty place, good for an ambush. Harlan turned to Ridge. Stay with the men here. Keep James as comfortable as possible. If he regains consciousness, learn whatever you can. You're going after the documents, Ridge said. It wasn't a question. Parker and I will scout the canyon, Harlan confirmed. If it looks secure, we'll retrieve whatever's there. If not, we'll return and develop a new plan. Ridge clearly wanted to object, but knew better. Instead, he nodded. 2 hours. If you're not back, we come looking. Fair enough. Harlan checked his revolver, then retrieved his rifle from Liberty's saddle. Parker, fresh horse for you. We travel light. As they prepared to depart, James stirred a wet cough, racking his body. Harlan knelt beside him. Doctor, he said urgently. Can you hear me? James's eyes opened, unfocused at first, then finding Harlan's face. Colonel, he whispered, did tell you about the canyon? Yes. Harlan leaned closer. What else should I know? Who shot you? Not who, what? James struggled for breath. Papers show. Orders came. Highest level. Washington. A weak nod. President. Approved. Massacre. Needed. Pretext for taking land. Harlan absorbed this information silently. It aligned with suspicions he'd harbored for years that the atrocities at Sand Creek had been not just permitted, but orchestrated from the highest levels of government. Gold, he prompted, remembering James's earlier comment. Paymaster's wagon. James confirmed, his voice barely audible now. Diverted, before attack, evidence in ledger. Where is this ledger? But James had slipped back into unconsciousness, his breathing now so shallow it was barely perceptible. Harlan stood exchanging a look with Ridge. Keep him alive if you can, he ordered. There's more he knows. Ridge nodded grimly. Hurry back, Colonel. I don't like how this is developing. Harlan couldn't disagree. What had begun as a pursuit of horse thieves had expanded into something far more complex, a conspiracy reaching back 15 years and up to the highest levels of government. The kind of truth that men killed to protect. Rattlesnake Canyon lived up to its name, a sinuous cut in the earth that wound between towering rock walls, its floor littered with loose stone and the bleached bones of animals unlucky enough to be caught there during flash floods. Parker led the way, his knowledge of the terrain proving invaluable as they navigated the treacherous approach. Not much further, he said over his shoulder. Canyon narrows ahead, then opens into a small basin. Good place to hide something. They proceeded with caution, alert for signs of others who might have reached the location first. The attack on James suggested that multiple parties were interested in his research, and at least one group was willing to kill for it. The canyon did indeed narrow, forcing them to dismount and lead their horses through a passage barely wide enough for the animals. Then, as Parker had described it, opened into a roughly circular basin, perhaps 50 yards across. Steep walls rose on all sides with only the narrow passage they had used providing access. Natural fortress, Parker observed. Defensible hidden but a death trap if someone blocks the exit. Harlan scanned the basin looking for the stone cairn James had mentioned. Nothing immediately stood out among the scattered rocks and sparse vegetation. Spread out, he ordered. Look for anything man-made. Stack stones, disturbed earth. They worked methodically, covering the basin in a grid pattern. It was Parker who found it, a carefully constructed pile of flat stones near the western wall, arranged in a way that nature never would have managed. Here, he called softly. Harlan joined him, studying the cairn. It stood about 3 feet high, the stones selected for stability rather than any aesthetic quality. Unremarkable except for its obvious human origin. What now? Parker asked. Dig beneath it. Harlan crouched, examining the base of the structure. No disturbed earth. I think... He reached out and carefully removed the topmost stone. Beneath it lay another, and beneath that, a space, a hollow within the cairn itself. Reaching in his fingers, touched something smooth and cool. Leather. He withdrew a satchel, weathered but well made, its flap secured with a small brass lock. That would be it, Parker said, keeping watch as Harlan examined the find. The lock posed no significant barrier. A firm twist with the butt of Harlan's knife popped it open. Inside the satchel, he found several document bundles wrapped in oilcloth for protection against the elements. Each was labeled in neat handwriting: testimonies, military correspondence, financial records. Genuine? Parker asked. Harlan unwrapped the first bundle and examined its contents. Letters on official Army stationery, bearing signatures he recognized from his time in service. Orders regarding the Colorado Territory, specifically the area around Sand Creek, dated 1864. Discussions of the Indian problem and the need for a decisive solution. Appears to be, he confirmed, rewrapping the documents and returning them to the satchel. Official correspondence that never should have left military archives. Stolen, or copied by someone with access, Harlan suggested. Either way, James was right. These would cause a significant stir if made public. He continued examining the bundles. The testimonies collection contained sworn statements from soldiers who had participated in the Sand Creek action, describing in brutal detail what had occurred and confirming that officers had ordered the slaughter of women and children. Several mentioned Harlan by name, noting his late arrival and attempt to stop the killing. The financial records proved most interesting: ledger entries showing a diversion of funds from the Denver paymaster's office to a special operations account just before the Sand Creek attack. A subsequent entry noted the funds as lost during Indian hostilities. The amount was substantial: $50,000 in gold coin, intended as payment for the Colorado volunteers but never delivered. Gold that officially never existed, Harlan murmured, vanished into the same bureaucratic void that swallowed my protest. Perfect theft, Parker agreed. Take the money, blame the Indians, then kill them all so no one can contradict the story. Harlan rewrapped the final bundle and secured the satchel. Time to go. They had just reached their horses when a sound stopped them, cold, the unmistakable metallic click of a rifle hammer being cocked. From the passage that formed the only exit from the basin, a voice called out, "That's far enough, Colonel Harlan. Drop the satchel and raise your hands." Harlan exchanged a glance with Parker. They were trapped in the basin, exposed with no cover within reach. Fighting would mean certain death. Do as he says, Harlan muttered. For now. Sure, they raised their hands slowly. From the passage emerged 3 men, each armed with Winchester rifles aimed squarely at Harlan and Parker. Their leader stepped forward, a tall man with the hard eyes and precise movements of professional military. Captain Wesley Reed, he introduced himself. Formerly of Army intelligence, currently employed by interests in Washington, who would prefer those documents remain private. Reed, Harlan repeated, recognition dawning. You were at Fort Lyon after. Reed nodded. Cleaning up the mess, including your inconvenient report. He gestured to the satchel that Harlan had dropped. Just as I'm cleaning up this mess now. By shooting an unarmed historian? James was warned, Reed said coldly. He chose to ignore that warning, as did you. Following orders, Harlan said, watching Reed's men position themselves. Like Sand Creek. Something flickered in Reed's eyes, not guilt exactly, but awareness. Those documents contain sensitive information that could damage national security. Reveal them and dozens of reputations would be destroyed, including your son's. The mention of his son struck Harlan like a physical blow. My son has nothing to do with this. Doesn't he? Reed smiled thinly. Junior's built quite a political career on his father's distinguished military service. Imagine the scandal if it became known that the esteemed Colonel Harlan was present at what some call a massacre. He shrugged. But then you never were officially there, were you? What do you want, Reed? Harlan demanded, his patience wearing thin. The satchel, obviously, and your silence. Reed gestured with his rifle. In return, you get to live. Simple transaction. And if I refuse, then I complete my assignment more permanently, Reed said matter-of-factly. Either way, those documents aren't leaving this canyon. Harlan assessed their situation with the cold calculation of a battlefield commander. 3 against 2 with the enemy holding superior position and firepower. Parker stood tense beside him, waiting for a signal, but the odds were prohibitive. The documents are one thing, Harlan said, playing for time. But what about the gold? 50,000 is a significant amount to simply write off. Reed's expression remained neutral, but something shifted in his posture. The gold was officially lost in action. That's all you need to know. Unless it wasn't lost at all, Harlan pressed. Unless someone diverted it before the attack using Sand Creek as cover for the theft. Someone who knew what was coming. Interesting theory, Reed said. Completely without evidence, of course. Harlan nodded toward the satchel. The ledger entries suggest otherwise. They show the money leaving Denver, but never arriving at Fort Lyon. Someone with knowledge of troop movements and access to official records could have arranged that quite easily. A muscle ticked in Reed's jaw. Enough talk. The satchel. Now. Harlan took a slow step forward, hands still raised. Tell me, Captain, how much did they pay you to bury this? Or did you simply help yourself to the gold and call it a bonus for services rendered? Reed's composure cracked just slightly. One more step, and I put a bullet in your leg, Colonel. Then we'll see how talkative you feel. But Harlan had seen what he needed to see, the flicker of guilt in Reed's eyes. The man knew about the gold, perhaps had even been involved in its disappearance, which meant he had a personal stake in ensuring these documents remained hidden. It also meant he wouldn't shoot to kill, not until he confirmed the documents were all accounted for. Harlan prepared to make his move a desperate gamble, but the only option available when the unmistakable sound of a shotgun being racked echoed through the canyon. I count 3, came a familiar voice from above. Colonel, you and Parker might want to step aside. All eyes turned upward. On the rim of the basin, silhouetted against the sky, stood Benji. The Apache boy held Thompson's shotgun, its twin barrels pointed down at Reed and his men. The moment of distraction was all Harlan needed. He dove for cover behind a boulder, drawing his revolver as he moved. Parker, equally quick, despite his years rolled in the opposite direction, coming up with his rifle ready. Reed and his men scattered, but in the confined space of the basin, there was a limited cover. Benji's shotgun roared the blast, striking the ground near Reed's feet, spraying rock fragments that tore into the man's legs. He went down with a cry of pain, his rifle clattering away. Harlan fired twice, driving one of Reed's men back into the passage. Parker's rifle cracked once, and the third man dropped, clutching his shoulder. Surrender, Reed, Harlan called. You're outflanked and outgunned. Reed, bleeding from a dozen small wounds in his legs, glared up at the basin rim, where Benji stood reloading the shotgun with the mechanical precision Parker had taught him. This changes nothing, Reed spat. Those documents can never become public. You know that as well as I do. Perhaps, Harlan agreed, approaching cautiously, his revolver trained on Reed's chest. But they can serve justice in other ways. From above, Benji called down, More riders coming. Colonel, east side. Harlan cursed under his breath. Parker, secure these men. Quickly. The old scout moved with surprising speed, disarming Reed's wounded companions and binding their wrists with leather thongs from his saddlebags. Harlan kept his weapon on Reed, who sat propped against a rock, blood soaking into his pant legs. Who else knows about this location? Harlan demanded. Reed laughed, a harsh sound without humor. You think I'm the only one they sent? Washington protects its secrets, Colonel. Always has, always will. The boy said east. Parker reported finishing with the prisoners. Could be Granger's men, or more of Reed's. Harlan made a swift decision. Get these three on their horses. We're taking them with us. He looked up at Benji. Boy, make your way down. Quickly now. As Parker handled the prisoners, Harlan retrieved the satchel, securing it to his saddle. The approaching riders would reach the canyon entrance, soon potentially trapping them inside. Their only chance was to leave immediately using the narrow passage while it remained open. Benji appeared moments later, scrambling down the steep wall with the agility of youth. The shotgun, almost as long as he was tall, remained clutched in his hands. I followed, he explained simply, like you taught me. Stay hidden, watch everything. Good work, Harlan acknowledged, helping the boy onto his horse. But you should have stayed at the ranch with Miss Abigail. Benji's expression turned solemn. Men came there too, after you left. Harlan froze. What men? What happened? Soldiers. Not in uniform, but they rode like soldiers. Benji's voice remained steady, though his hands tightened on the shotgun. Miss Abigail saw them coming, sent me out the back way, told me to find you. And she stayed? Harlan's voice was dangerously quiet. Benji nodded. She had Thompson's other shotgun. Said she'd slow them down. A cold fury settled in Harlan's chest. Abigail had been with him for 20 years, loyal beyond any reasonable expectation. The thought of her facing armed men alone. Colonel Parker called urgently. Riders at the entrance. Time to decide. Harlan looked toward the narrow passage. Dust rose beyond it, indicating the approach of multiple horses. Within moments, the way would be blocked. We go through, he decided. Hard and fast. Parker, you lead with the prisoners. I'll cover our rear with the boy. They mounted quickly, forming a column with Parker at the front, then Reed and his two men, followed by Harlan, with Benji riding double behind him. The satchel of documents remained secure at Harlan's side, its contents potentially worth more than gold in terms of leverage. Ready, Parker called. Harlan drew his revolver. Now! They surged forward, horses bunching in the narrow passage, hooves striking sparks from stone as they thundered toward the exit. They burst into the open just as the first of the approaching riders came into view, a group of 6 men who scattered in surprise at their sudden appearance. Harlan had a brief impression of unfamiliar faces, weapons being raised, shouts of confusion. Then they were past, galloping toward the relative safety of the broken country to the west. Shots followed them, bullets whining overhead or kicking up dust at their horses' feet. Harlan twisted in the saddle, returning fire to discourage pursuit. Beside him, Benji clung tightly to his waist face, pressed against his back to avoid the stinging rush of wind. They rode hard for 10 minutes before Parker signaled for a slower pace to spare the horses. No immediate pursuit had materialized, suggesting the other group had been more interested in the canyon than in Harlan's party. Looking for the documents, Parker surmised as they settled into a ground-covering trot. Probably another team of Reed's people sent as backup. Or someone else entirely, Harlan replied grimly. This situation has too many players. Reed, riding ahead of them with his hands bound to his saddle horn, glanced back. You're beginning to understand, Colonel. This is bigger than you can handle. Surrender the documents now and perhaps we can still arrange your safety. The way you arrange for Dr. James's safety, Harlan's tone was acid. Or for my ranch's, Reed shrugged, wincing as the motion disturbed his wounded legs. Collateral damage. Unfortunate but necessary. We'll see what's necessary, Harlan said coldly. For now, you're our insurance against further attacks. I suggest you pray your colleagues value your life more than they valued others. They rode westward, angling toward Thompson's Gulch, where Ridge and the others waited. Harlan's mind churned with the implications of what they discovered and what Benji had reported. The attack on his ranch changed everything. No longer was this simply about recovering stolen property or even uncovering historical truth. It had become personal in a way that demanded response. As they rode, Benji spoke quietly, his voice barely audible over the rhythm of hoofbeats. Colonel, there's something else. Harlan glanced back at the boy. What is it? Before I left, Miss Abigail gave me a letter. He shifted, reaching into his shirt to extract a folded paper. Said it came yesterday. For you. Harlan took the letter, immediately recognizing the handwriting, the same elegant script as the previous communication from his son. He tucked it away without reading, focusing on the trail ahead. Whatever Junior had to say could wait until they reached safety. The sun had begun its descent toward the western horizon, casting long shadows across the landscape. In those shadows, Harlan imagined other forces were moving Granger and his men, additional government agents, perhaps even his son's representatives, all converging on a truth 15 years buried. Liberty moved steadily beneath him, the stallion's stride never faltering despite the long day. Like his master, the horse understood endurance, the capacity to continue when others would falter. It would be needed in the days ahead. "Almost there," Parker called from the lead position. "Gulch entrance just beyond that ridge." Harlan nodded, then turned to Benji. "When we arrive, I want you to stay with Ridge. No more following. Understood?" The boy hesitated, then nodded reluctantly. "Yes, Colonel." They crested the ridge of the Gulch entrance, coming into view below. Ridge had positioned men at the high points, providing overlapping fields of fire that would make any assault costly. Good tactical thinking, though. Harlan would have expected nothing less from his lieutenant. As they descended toward the entrance, a sentry whistled a recognition signal. Parker responded in kind, and they were admitted without challenge. Inside the gulch, Ridge waited, expression grave. "Colonel," he greeted, "found what you were looking for." Harlan dismounted, helping Benji down after him. "That and more." "How's James?" Ridge shook his head. "Died about an hour ago. Never regained consciousness." Harlan absorbed this news silently. Another death to lay at the feet of those who would keep the past buried. The historian had seemed naive in his academic pursuit of truth, but his courage in the face of powerful opposition deserved respect. "We have company," he said, nodding toward Reed and his men, now being escorted from their horses by Parker. "Captain Reed, formerly of Army Intelligence, currently employed by Interest in Washington, to use his phrase." Ridge studied the prisoners, his expression hardening as he recognized the type. "The same interests that sent men to your ranch, I'm guessing?" "Likely so." Harlan handed the reins of his horse to one of the men. "See to Liberty. He's earned his rest." Then to Ridge, "We need to talk. Privately." They withdrew to a secluded corner of the gulch, where a small overhang provided both shade and privacy. Harlan removed the satchel from his saddle and placed it between them. "James was right about the documents," he said without preamble. "Official correspondence, witness testimonies, financial records. Enough to prove Sand Creek was ordered from the highest levels." Ridge whistled softly. That would explain the government's interest in silencing him. "But what about Granger? How does he fit into this?" "He was there," Harlan replied. "At Sand Creek. Saw everything, including my attempt to stop it." He paused. "And likely knows about the money." "Money? 50,000 in gold? A payroll that officially went missing during the hostilities, but actually never reached the field. Someone used Sand Creek as cover for theft, and the records in here," he tapped the satchel, "suggest high-level involvement." Ridge absorbed this information with the careful consideration of a man who understood its weight. "So we have stolen horses, stolen gold, and government secrets, plus Granger's personal vendetta against you. Complicated situation, Colonel." "Made more so by this." Harlan withdrew the letter Benji had delivered. "From my son." He broke the seal and unfolded the paper. As he read, his expression grew increasingly grim. When he finished, he handed it to Ridge without comment. Ridge read quickly, then looked up, his face troubled. "He's coming here personally." "So it seems," Harlan confirmed. "Junior claims he wants to resolve the situation amicably before the Army Investigative Committee arrives. Says he can protect me if I cooperate." "Do you believe him?" Harlan's gaze turned distant, focusing on memories only he could see. "My son has his mother's ambition and his grandfather's political instincts. Neither quality lends itself to sentimentality where family is concerned." "Then what's our next move?" Harlan withdrew the charred map fragment they had found in Granger's camp. When aligned with the letter from his son, a pattern emerged, two forces converging on a single location. Not by chance, but by design. "Someone," he said slowly, "is orchestrating all of this, using Granger as bait to draw me out, using the documents as bait for Reed and his men, using my son's political ambitions as leverage." "Who has that kind of reach?" Ridge asked. Who benefits from exposing Sand Creek now, after all these years? Harlan refolded both documents carefully. I don't know, but I intend to find out. Hero's decision made. We break camp at dawn, head north to the rendezvous point Junior indicated. Walking into another trap. Perhaps, Harlan acknowledged, but sometimes the only way to disarm a trap is to spring it on your terms. As they rejoined the main group, the sun finally slipped below the horizon, plunging the gulch into deep shadow. In that gathering darkness, Harlan found himself returning to the imagery that had haunted his dreams for 15 years. Screaming women, terrified children, smoke rising from burning teepees. Sand Creek, the place where his understanding of honor had been irrevocably altered. Now it seemed those ghosts would finally have their day of reckoning. The question that remained was whether justice or vengeance would prevail when they did. Liberty whickered softly from where he had been unsaddled and watered. The old warhorse sensed the coming storm, as he had sensed so many before. Harlan approached him, running a hand along the stallion's muscled neck. "One more campaign, old friend," he murmured. "One last charge." The horse nudged his shoulder in response, a gesture of solidarity between battle-tested companions. Around them, men prepared for night watch cleaned. Weapons spoke in low voices about the day's events. The calm before the storm. Harlan turned his gaze northward toward the lands where his greatest failure had occurred. Where blood had soaked into earth that remembered longer than men. Where perhaps redemption waited, or judgment. Either way, the time for hiding from the past had ended. The dead of Sand Creek would have their witness at last. Dawn broke cold and clear over Blood Gorge. The narrow canyon stretched for nearly a mile, its steep walls rising 300 feet above a floor littered with boulders and sparse vegetation. A small stream bisected the gorge, fed by mountain snowmelt miles away. The water ran red in places where iron deposits stained the rocks, a natural phenomenon that had given the place its ominous name long before human blood had been spilled there. Harlan stood on the eastern rim, Liberty motionless beside him. From this vantage point, he could see the entire length of the gorge and the rolling plains beyond. It was perfect terrain for what he had planned, enclosed enough to funnel movement, open enough to allow maneuver. The kind of battlefield a cavalry officer would choose. Parker joined him, rifle cradled in the crook of his arm. The old scout had spent the pre-dawn hours setting markers at various distances throughout the gorge, small piles of white stones that would help their shooters judge range when the time came. "Ridge has the men positioned," Parker reported. 20 total, counting our original group and the extras he recruited from Fort Stanton. Harlan nodded, eyes still scanning the landscape. "Reed's men, secured in that cave we found. 4 guards. They won't be joining the festivities. And Benji," Parker's weathered face creased with a rare smile. "Boy refused to stay behind, so I put him on lookout duty. High point 2 miles east. Perfect view of any approach." He tapped the small brass telescope hanging at his belt. "Gave him this. First sign of riders, he'll signal with the mirror I showed him how to use." Harlan approved silently. The Apache boy had proven his worth repeatedly. Denying him a role would have been both unfair and wasteful of talent. "What about the documents?" Parker asked. "With Ridge, if things go badly, he has instructions to get them to Fort Stanton. Captain Reynolds will know what to do." Parker studied his old friend's profile. "You're expecting things to go badly." It wasn't a question, but Harlan answered anyway. "When my son is involved, always." The sun climbed higher, burning away the morning chill. Harlan's men remained hidden among the rocks of the gorge, their positions carefully chosen to provide maximum coverage with minimum exposure. They had arrived hours before dawn, moving silently through terrain Parker knew intimately from his scouting days. Now they waited. Harlan's plan was simple in concept, complex in execution. Junior's letter had named Blood Gorge as the meeting place, a location that couldn't be coincidental. This was where the surviving Cheyenne had fled after Sand Creek, where cavalry units had hunted them down in the days following the massacre, where more blood had been spilled to ensure silence, the same place where 15 years ago a payroll wagon had allegedly been lost. "Colonel," Parker said suddenly, pointing, "signal from Benji." A flash of reflected sunlight winked from the distant lookout position, 3 short bursts followed by a long one. Riders approaching from the east, many of them. "It's time," Harlan said, turning to Mount Liberty. Remember the plan. No shots until my signal. Parker nodded, already moving to his assigned position on the northern rim. From there, he would coordinate their riflemen, his experienced eye guiding their fire if it became necessary. Harlan guided Liberty down a narrow trail to the gorge floor. The stallion moved with sure-footed confidence despite the treacherous terrain, a testament to both breeding and training. At the bottom, they took position near a massive boulder that would provide cover if needed. 10 minutes passed, then 20. The sun climbed higher, casting shorter shadows across the gorge floor. Birds that had fallen silent at their arrival gradually resumed their calls, filling the air with disjointed melody. Then came the sound of hoofbeats, distant at first but growing steadily louder. Horses entering the gorge from the eastern end, a large group moving at a deliberate pace. Not charging, but advancing with purpose. Harlan remained motionless, one hand resting on Liberty's neck to keep the stallion calm. The satchel containing James's documents hung from his saddle horn, a deliberate display of what they had come for. The riders emerged around a bend in the gorge, 15 men in formation, dust rising from their horses' hooves to hang in the still air. At their head rode two figures Harlan recognized immediately: his son Junior, dressed impeccably despite the frontier setting, and beside him, Wade Granger, older and harder than Harlan remembered, but unmistakable. An unlikely alliance made understandable only by mutual interest. Harlan nudged Liberty forward, advancing to meet them at the center of the gorge where the stream crossed their path. As he did, he was acutely aware of Parker and Ridge's men watching from concealed positions, rifles trained on the newcomers. The two groups halted 30 yards apart. For a long moment, silence reigned, broken only by the soft gurgle of the stream and the occasional snort of a horse. Junior was the first to speak, his voice carrying clearly in the enclosed space. "Father, you're looking well for a man your age." "Junior," Harlan acknowledged with a nod. "Unexpected company you're keeping." His son smiled thinly. "Sergeant Granger has been most helpful in certain matters. We share common interests." "Such as?" "The truth about Sand Creek." Granger interjected, his voice rougher than Junior's cultured tones. "Long overdue, wouldn't you say, Colonel?" Harlan studied the man who had once been his sergeant. Time had not been kind to Wade Granger. Deep lines carved his face and gray threaded his beard. But his eyes remained the same, sharp with intelligence and burning with something between hatred and purpose. "Truth comes in many forms, Sergeant," Harlan replied evenly. "Depends on who's telling it." "Precisely why we're here," Junior said smoothly. "To ensure the correct version reaches Washington." He gestured to the satchel on Harlan's saddle. "I believe you have something that belongs to me." "These documents belong to Dr. Elliot James," Harlan corrected. "A historian who was murdered for possessing them." Junior's expression registered appropriate shock. "Murdered? How terrible. Another reason these sensitive materials should be entrusted to proper authorities." He extended his hand. "If you'll just—" "What's your stake in this, Junior?" Harlan interrupted. "Why involve yourself in events that happened when you were barely 10 years old?" A flash of annoyance crossed his son's face at the childhood nickname, but he recovered quickly. "As a representative of this government, I have a duty to protect its interests, including historical records that might be misinterpreted by the uninformed." "Misinterpreted?" Harlan repeated flatly. "Like orders to slaughter women and children? Like diverting 50,000 in gold before the attack? Those kinds of misinterpretations." Junior's composure slipped for just a moment, a tightening around the eyes, a slight paling of the skin. Then the political mask slid back into place. "I see James shared his theories with you before his unfortunate demise." Junior sighed theatrically. "Father, these are complicated matters. Historical context must be considered. The nation was emerging from civil war. The frontier situation was volatile." "Spare me the speech," Harlan cut in. "You've had men searching for these documents for weeks. Reed's team at the ranch. The attack at Stone Table Mesa. None of that suggests historical context as your primary concern." "Captain Reed exceeded his authority," Junior replied, the smoothness never leaving his voice. "If anyone at your ranch was harmed, I assure you it was not by my order." "Then whose order?" Harlan demanded. "Who are you really working for, Junior?" A different voice answered Granger's hard with suppressed emotion. "Tell him. He deserves to know who's pulling your strings." Junior shot Granger a venomous look, but the damage was done. Harlan could see the alliance between them was fragile at best, united only by temporary necessity. "The Committee for Western Development," Junior said finally, "a consortium of businessmen and politicians with interests in the territories. They've been most supportive of my career. In exchange for certain favors," Harlan guessed, "like retrieving documents that might expose their involvement in Sand Creek." Junior didn't deny it. "Progress requires compromise, Father. Always has." "Progress," Harlan echoed. "Is that what you call it when men like Reed murder civilians? When homes are raided, when history is buried to protect the powerful? I call it necessity." Junior snapped his composure, finally cracking. "The same necessity that guided this nation's expansion. The same necessity that made men like you both hero and villain." He gestured between Harlan and Granger. "You two are relics. The frontier is closing. The Indian wars are ending. What matters now is who controls the narrative going forward." Harlan absorbed this with outward calm, though inwardly something cold and hard settled in his chest. His son had become everything Martha had feared, a political animal whose principles shifted with the prevailing winds of power. "And the gold," he asked quietly, "was that necessity too?" For the first time, genuine confusion showed on Junior's face. "What gold? Don't play dumb," Granger growled. "The payroll, 50,000 that vanished just before Sand Creek, money that bought a lot of silence afterward." Junior's confusion appeared genuine. "I don't know what you're talking about." An unexpected development. Harlan studied his son carefully, looking for signs of deception. Finding none, he shifted his attention to Granger. "You think Junior knows where the money is," he realized. "That's why you aligned with him, to get close enough to find it." Granger's weathered face revealed nothing, but his silence was confirmation enough. "Interesting partnership," Harlan continued. "My son wants the documents to protect his political backers. You want them because they might lead to the gold. Meanwhile, Reed and his employers want both to disappear permanently." "Complicated situation," Junior acknowledged, regaining his composure. "But it can be resolved simply. Give me the documents. In return, I ensure Reed faces consequences for his actions at your ranch, and Sergeant Granger receives a full pardon for his entrepreneurial activities." "And what do I receive?" Harlan asked. Junior smiled, all politician now. "Peace, Father. The comfort of knowing your name remains unstained in history. The satisfaction of seeing your son continue his rise in Washington. Isn't that enough?" Before Harlan could respond, movement caught his eye, a flash of light from the lookout position where Benji watched. The signal pattern was different this time, 4 short flashes. Danger approaching. Simultaneously, Parker's whistle sounded from the northern rim. Urgent. Warning. "We have company," Harlan announced, turning Liberty to scan the western entrance to the gorge. "Uninvited." Junior frowned. "What are you talking about? No one else knows about this meeting." "Someone does." Granger contradicted, his hand moving to his holstered revolver. "And they're coming fast." The sound reached them moments later, horses at full gallop charging into the gorge from the west. As they watched, riders appeared around the bend. 6 men in nondescript clothing, but moving with military precision. Leading them was a face Harlan recognized instantly, despite the years that had passed. "Chivington," he breathed. Colonel John Chivington, the butcher of Sand Creek, officially retired from military service, but apparently still active in other capacities. Older, grayer, heavier, but unmistakable with his distinctive beard and commanding presence. "What the hell is he doing here?" Granger demanded, genuine alarm in his voice. Junior appeared equally surprised. "This wasn't arranged. Father, I swear it." Harlan believed him. The look of shock on his son's face couldn't be feigned, nor could the tension that suddenly gripped Granger's posture. Neither had expected Chivington's appearance, which meant someone else was orchestrating events from behind the scenes. Chivington and his men pulled up 30 yards away, forming a line that effectively blocked the western exit from the gorge. With Junior's group at the eastern end, Harlan found himself caught between opposing forces, exactly as someone had planned. "Colonel Harlan," Chivington called, his voice still carrying the booming authority of a former preacher. "Been a long time, Sand Creek if memory serves." "Chivington," Harlan acknowledged coldly. "I thought you'd retired to Denver." Business opportunities called me back to the field, Chivington replied with a smile that didn't reach his eyes, including the opportunity to recover certain items that rightfully belonged to me. Understanding dawned. The gold, Harlan said. It was you. Chivington inclined his head slightly. A pension for services rendered to this great nation, arranged by grateful parties in Washington who preferred that certain events remain discreetly managed. You mean the massacre you ordered? Harlan said bluntly. I mean the military engagement I commanded. Chivington corrected his smile, never wavering. History is written by the victor's colonel, something your boy there understands quite well. He nodded toward Junior. Though I'm disappointed he failed to secure the documents as promised. Junior stiffened. I made no promises to you, Chivington. Our arrangement was with the committee, not with you personally. The committee sent me to ensure completion, Chivington replied. They've grown impatient with your diplomatic approach. The pieces fell into place for Harlan. The Committee for Western Development. They were behind Sand Creek from the beginning. The land was cleared for their investments. Progress requires sacrifice, Chivington said, echoing Junior's earlier words. The committee understood that then, as they do now. He gestured to the satchel on Harlan's saddle. The documents, if you please, and information on where James hid the gold. And if I refuse, Harlan asked, though he already knew the answer. Chivington's false smile faded. Then this gorge earns its name again today. My men have orders to leave no witnesses if the documents aren't secured. The threat hung in the air, made more ominous by the gorge's enclosed space. Harlan could feel multiple forces balancing on a knife's edge, Chivington's men to the West Juniors group to the east, and his own hidden forces watching from the rims. One wrong move would trigger a bloodbath. The gold was never here, Harlan said, playing for time. That was a story created to cover its theft before the attack even began. Chivington's eyes narrowed. James's notes suggested otherwise. The payroll wagon reached Sand Creek according to his research. James was misled, Harlan countered. The wagon arrived empty. The gold had already been diverted by you, apparently. Uncertainty flickered across Chivington's face, the first genuine emotion he had shown. If you're lying, ask yourself who benefits from bringing all the interested parties together in one remote location? Harlan interrupted. Not me, not Junior, not even Granger. He paused significantly. Someone wants us all eliminated, Chivington. Someone who knows what really happened to the gold. The former colonel's eyes darted around the gorge, suddenly alert for hidden threats. His men sensed the change in him, shifting nervously in their saddles. Enough talk, Junior interjected, his political instincts asserting themselves. Father, give me the documents. We can resolve this situation without bloodshed. Can we? Harlan asked quietly. Once these documents disappear, what's to stop Chivington from eliminating all witnesses? What's to stop your committee friends from deciding your liability? Junior's confident expression faltered, doubt creeping in as he glanced between Harlan and Chivington. For the first time, perhaps, he was considering that he might not be the cleverest player in this dangerous game. The tension stretched taut as a bowstring. Harlan could feel liberty tense beneath him, the stallion sensing the imminent violence. Around them, the gorge had fallen silent, even the birds ceasing their calls as if awaiting the outcome. Then from above, a new voice called down, Colonel Harlan riders approaching from the north, 20 or more. Benji's warning triggered immediate reactions. Chivington's men drew weapons, swinging to face the new threat. Junior's group backed their horses, nervously unsure where to focus their attention. Granger alone remained calm, his hard eyes fixed on Harlan. You planned this. He said, something like admiration in his voice. Harlan shook his head. Not this part. From his vantage point, he could now see dust rising beyond the northern rim, evidence of a large group approaching at speed. Not Parker's men who were already positioned, not Reed's reinforcements who would have come from the south. Someone else had entered the game. Hold positions, Harlan called to his hidden forces. Wait for my signal. The new arrivals crested the rim moments later. Mounted warriors silhouetted against the sky, their presence announced by a ululating war cry that echoed through the gorge. Native riders armed with a mixture of traditional weapons and modern firearms. At their head rode a figure Harlan had believed long-dead Chief Nyaka of the Southern Cheyenne, one of the few leaders to escape the Sand Creek massacre. Older now, his face lined with years of hardship, but unmistakable with his distinctive bear claw necklace and the white stallion he rode. Impossible, Chivington breathed. He died at Solomon Fork. Another of your convenient fictions, Harlan replied, watching as the Cheyenne warriors spread out along the rim, effectively surrounding everyone in the gorge below. Nyaka raised his hand, and his warriors halted, maintaining their positions on the high ground. The chief himself guided his horse down a narrow trail to the gorge floor, approaching alone in a gesture that mixed confidence with diplomacy. He stopped beside Harlan, acknowledging him with a slight nod before turning his attention to the others. The circle closes. Nyaka said, his English deliberate but clear. 15 winters and the spirits bring all together again. Chivington's face had drained of color. To him, Nyaka represented a ghost from the past, a witness he had believed silenced forever. What is this? Junior demanded, his political poise deserting him entirely. Father, what have you done? I've done nothing, Harlan replied calmly. Chief Nyaka found me 2 days ago. He's been watching these events unfold, just as I have. The boy led me to you, Nyaka explained, nodding toward the rim where Benji watched. He knows our ways, recognized our signs. Understanding dawned for Harlan. The markers on the trail, they weren't from James or Granger's men. Nyaka inclined his head in confirmation. We have followed this path many moons, waiting for the time when truth could be heard. This changes nothing, Chivington blustered, though his voice lacked conviction. The documents must be secured. National security, national shame, Nyaka corrected firmly. The papers speak truth. We have seen them. This revelation startled everyone. Harlan turned to the chief. You've read James's research. The one you call James came to our people, Nyaka explained. Many moons ago, listened to our stories, showed us what he found in white man's records. A ghost of a smile crossed his weathered face. We helped him hide both papers and gold. The gold exists, Junior asked sharply, his attention captured by this detail. Gold that bought the death of our people, Nyaka confirmed grimly. Hidden where only those who remember can find it. Chivington had heard enough. With a sharp gesture to his men, he drew his revolver. This farce ends now. The documents and the location of the gold, or we open fire. Harlan sensed the moment balancing on a razor's edge. One shot would trigger a massacre potentially worse than Sand Creek, with his son caught in the crossfire. He raised his hand ready to signal Parker and Ridge's men to intervene. But Nyaka was faster. He lifted a small bone whistle to his lips and blew a single piercing note. Instantly, the rim of the gorge bristled with movement as more warriors appeared, 50 or more each, with a rifle or bow trained on the men below. They had been there all along, hidden so effectively that even Parker hadn't detected them. 15 winters we have waited, Nyaka said into the stunned silence that followed. Gathering strength, learning white man's ways, preparing for this day. He turned to Harlan. You tried to stop the killing. We remember this. But your words were buried like our dead. I failed. Harlan acknowledged the admission torn from some deep place within him. I should have done more. Perhaps, Nyaka allowed. But today you can finish what was started. He gestured, and one of his warriors rode down to join them, carrying a bundle wrapped in tanned hide. The warrior handed it to Nyaka, who in turn offered it to Harlan. The true record, the chief explained. All papers together. James entrusted them to us before he journeyed to meet you. Harlan accepted the bundle, feeling its weight physically light but heavy with implications. And the gold, safe, Nyaka assured him, until its purpose is decided. The standoff continued with Chivington and his men effectively trapped by the warriors above, and Junior's group caught between opposing forces. Granger alone seemed oddly at peace, as if witnessing the culmination of a long-expected reckoning. What happens now? Junior asked, his political calculation visibly working behind his eyes. What do you want? Nyaka considered him with the measured gaze of a man who had seen too many broken promises. Justice, truth told, land returned. Simple things made complicated by men like you. Impossible demands, Junior scoffed, though, without conviction. The government would never. The government, Harlan interrupted, We'll do whatever necessary to avoid scandal, especially when evidence exists that its highest officials authorized the massacre of innocent women and children for financial gain. He untied the hide wrapping, revealing additional documents beyond what James had hidden in the canyon. Among them lay a folded paper bearing the presidential seal, an executive order authorizing extreme measures to secure the Colorado Territory for development, signed 2 weeks before Sand Creek. "My God," Junior breathed, recognizing the implications instantly. "That would destroy the administration, past and present." "Yes," Harlan agreed, "which is why you're going to help ensure it reaches the right people." Junior's head snapped up. "Me? You expect me to commit political suicide?" "I expect you to choose a side," Harlan replied, his voice hardening. "The men who authorized this atrocity used your ambition against you, son, made you their unwitting agent. The question is whether you continue serving them now that you know the truth." The moment stretched between them, father and son, separated by years of estrangement and fundamentally different values. Harlan could see the calculation happening behind Junior's eyes, the weighing of moral imperative against political survival. "What exactly are you proposing?" Junior asked finally. "Controlled disclosure," Harlan said. "Through the congressional committee you mentioned, present yourself as the one who discovered these documents and brought them forward out of patriotic duty. Frame it as exposing past wrongs to prevent future ones." Political considerations visibly warred with self-preservation in Junior's expression. "The committee would crucify me." "They'll try," Harlan acknowledged, "unless you have protection from a higher authority." "What higher authority?" "The president," Nayaka interjected, surprising everyone, "who sent his own investigators 3 moons ago, men who also spoke with James." This revelation landed like a thunderbolt. Junior's eyes widened as implications cascaded through his mind. "A counter-operation against the committee." "Politics," Nayaka said with thinly veiled disgust. "Always wheels within wheels." Chivington, who had remained silent during this exchange, suddenly spurred his horse forward. "Enough, I didn't survive this long to be undone by politics." His revolver came up, aimed squarely at Harlan. "The documents. Now." Before anyone could react, Granger's voice cut through the tension. "Put it down, John. It's over." All eyes turned to the former sergeant who had drawn his own weapon with the smooth efficiency of long practice. It was trained unwaveringly on Chivington. "Wade," Chivington said, genuine surprise in his voice. "You're with me on this. You always have been." "I was with the money," Granger corrected coldly. 15 years I've hunted for it. 15 years living with what we did at Sand Creek. I'm done." "Done," Chivington's face contorted with fury. "After everything I've given you, the pardons, the opportunities, the nightmares," Granger suggested, "the blood that won't wash off the faces of children that visit me every night." His hand remained rock steady on his revolver. "You used me at Sand Creek, used all of us, made us monsters for your profit." "You were already a monster," Chivington sneered. "I just pointed you at the enemy." "They weren't the enemy," Granger said quietly. "They were people, unarmed, under a flag of truce, just like now." The parallel hung in the air between them, history poised to repeat itself unless someone chose differently. Harlan could feel liberty tense beneath him, the stallion sensing the imminent violence. Around them, warriors on the rim and hidden riflemen among the rocks held their positions, awaiting the spark that would ignite this powder keg. "Stand down, Chivington," Harlan said, his voice carrying the command presence that had once led men into battle. "There are 200 rifles aimed at your position. Even if you shoot me, you won't leave this gorge alive." For a moment it seemed Chivington might risk it anyway. His finger tightened on the trigger, his face a mask of thwarted rage. Then slowly calculation replaced emotion. He lowered the weapon. "This isn't over," he promised. "Men like us built this nation. We don't surrender to savages and traitors." "Men like you stain this nation," Harlan corrected. "The difference matters." He turned to Nayaka. "Chief, I propose these terms. Chivington and his men surrender their weapons and face military justice for their actions at Sand Creek. The documents are presented to Congress through official channels." He glanced at Junior. "My son will ensure they reach the proper authorities with your representatives present to verify nothing is omitted." And the gold, Nyaka asked. Returned to its rightful owners, Harlan said. The families of those killed at Sand Creek. A trust established in their name, administered jointly by your people and independent overseers. Nyaka considered this proposal, his ageless eyes evaluating Harlan's sincerity. Finally, he nodded. Acceptable terms, if your son agrees. All attention shifted to Junior, who sat rigidly in his saddle, the political calculation almost visible behind his eyes. His career hung in the balance as potential disgrace, if he refused potential redemption, if he embraced a role as reformer. I'll need guarantees, he said finally. Written statements that I was unaware of the committee's true nature. Evidence that I cooperated fully once I learned the truth. You'll have them, Harlan promised, along with the satisfaction of knowing you chose right over expedient for once. A barb but one Junior accepted with a slight incline of his head. Then I agree to the terms. The tension in the gorge eased fractionally. Chivington and his men, recognizing the balance of power, had shifted decisively, surrendered their weapons to warriors who descended from the rim. Junior's group likewise disarmed as a show of good faith. Only Granger remained apart, his revolver still trained on Chivington, even as others laid down their arms. Sergeant, Harlan said quietly, it's over. Granger's eyes never left Chivington. Is it men like him always find a way out? Money, influence, connections. Not this time, Harlan assured him. Too many witnesses, too much evidence. The world has changed since Sand Creek. Has it? Granger's voice held 15 years of doubt. Tell that to the Cheyenne. Tell that to the families we destroyed. Then help make it right, Harlan urged. Your testimony combined with these documents, it could ensure justice finally comes. Something shifted in Granger's weathered face, not quite hope, but perhaps its distant cousin. Slowly he lowered his weapon. I'll testify, he said. Everything I saw, everything I did. His gaze moved to Nyaka. For whatever it's worth after all this time. The chief acknowledged this with a solemn nod. Truth has no season. It flowers whenever planted. As arrangements were made to transport prisoners and secure the documents, Harlan found himself alone with Nyaka at the edge of the stream. Liberty drank deeply beside them while the chief's white stallion stood sentinel nearby. You knew, Harlan said, about all of it. The gold, the documents, the committee. We have watched, Nyaka confirmed. Learned your ways. Used them when necessary. He studied Harlan with eyes that had witnessed both the worst and best of humanity. You carry guilt like a stone. I failed to stop it, Harlan said simply. I carry that responsibility. One man cannot turn a river, Nyaka observed, but one stone can change its course given time. He gestured to where Chivington sat, disarmed and defeated. Today the river changes. Before Harlan could respond, Benji appeared, having made his way down from his lookout position. The boy approached, cautiously respectful of the conversation between elders. Colonel, he said, Parker says everything is secured. The prisoners are ready for transport. Harlan nodded, placing a hand on the boy's shoulder. Well done today. Your warning saved lives. Benji straightened at the praise, though his eyes were drawn to Nyaka with undisguised curiosity. The chief studied him in return recognition, dawning in his ageless gaze. This one has Jicarilla blood, he observed, but something more. His eyes are old. He saw his family killed, Harlan explained. 3 years ago. I found him afterward. Understanding passed between the men, a shared recognition of cycles that had repeated too often across the frontier. Nyaka extended his hand to Benji, who took it with solemn dignity beyond his years. You have walked a hard path, young one, the chief said, but you are not alone on it. Something passed between them in that moment, a connection that transcended the barriers of language and culture. Benji nodded as if receiving wisdom that required no words. The boy turned to Harlan. What happens now, Colonel? A simple question with a complex answer. Harlan looked across the gorge where history's ghosts seemed to linger among the shadows. Justice if we're fortunate, truth at minimum. And after, Benji persisted, when it's finished. Harlan hadn't considered beyond the immediate resolution. For 15 years, the weight of Sand Creek had defined his existence, shaped his exile, fueled his nightmares, dictated his isolation. Without that burden, what remained? I don't know, he admitted. The ranch perhaps, though it won't be the same. It never is, Nayaka said with the wisdom of one who had lost everything and begun anew. But there are other paths. He gestured toward the northern horizon. My people have land, protected by new treaties. Land that needs healing as do those who live there. The invitation was clear, though unexpected. You would welcome me, Harlan asked, genuine surprise in his voice. After everything, because of everything, Nayaka corrected. You tried when others did not. You remember when others choose to forget. His gaze encompassed Benji as well. Both of you carry wounds that our ways might help heal. The offer hung in the air between them, redemption perhaps, or at least the chance to build something from the ashes of the past. Not forgiveness exactly, but purpose. Before Harlan could respond, Liberty nudged his shoulder insistently, as if offering his own opinion on the matter. The old warhorse had carried him through battle and exile. Perhaps he deserved peaceful pastures for his remaining years. I'll consider it, Harlan said finally, after matters here are concluded. Nayaka accepted this with a nod. The path remains open when you are ready. As they rejoined the main group, preparations for departure were nearly complete. Junior approached his political mask firmly back in place, though strain showed around his eyes. We leave within the hour, he reported. Chivington and his men will be escorted to Fort Stanton under guard. I'll accompany them with the documents, then continue to Washington. He hesitated, something almost vulnerable crossing his face. Will you come with me, Father? Your testimony would carry significant weight. The request surprised Harlan. After years of estrangement, it represented a tentative bridge across the chasm between them. My written statement will suffice, he replied, not unkindly. This is your path now, Junior. Walk it honorably. His son absorbed this with a complex mixture of emotions. Relief, perhaps, that his father would not overshadow him. Disappointment that their reconciliation would not be more complete. Understanding that some distances could be narrowed but never fully closed. As you wish, Junior said formally. Then more quietly, thank you for giving me this chance. Harlan nodded, accepting the gratitude without requiring more. They were different men shaped by different forces. Peace between them would have to be enough. As Junior walked away, Ridge approached from where he had been overseeing the prisoners. All ready, Colonel. Parker's arranging the escort party now. Good work, Joseph, Harlan said. I'll need you to accompany them to Fort Stanton. Ensure nothing goes astray before they reach Captain Reynolds. Ridge studied him carefully. And you, sir, will you be joining us? I have other matters to attend to first, Harlan replied. I'll follow when they're concluded. Understanding dawned in Ridge's eyes. The ranch, of course. He hesitated. Colonel, about Miss Abigail. We still don't know. I know, Harlan interrupted gently. One bridge at a time, Joseph. Ridge nodded, accepting the wisdom of focusing on immediate concerns. We'll rendezvous at Fort Stanton then. Perhaps, Harlan said, his gaze drifting northward, where Nayaka's offer waited. Or perhaps elsewhere. The preparations continued around them, horses being saddled, prisoners, secured documents carefully packed for the journey. Granger stood apart from both groups, a man between worlds, watching the proceedings with the detached air of one who had expected a different ending to this day. Harlan approached him, conscious of their shared history and the blood that both united and divided them. What will you do now? He asked without preamble. Granger considered the question with the gravity it deserved. Testify, as I said. After that, he shrugged. Never expected to live this long. Never planned beyond revenge. A hollow objective, Harlan observed. I've discovered. So it seems. Granger's weathered face revealed little, but his eyes held a weariness beyond physical exhaustion. 15 years hunting ghosts only to find they were hunting me too. There are other paths, Harlan said, echoing Nayaka's words. Other purposes. Granger's mouth twisted in a humorless smile. For men like us with blood on our hands? Especially for men like us, Harlan replied, because we know the cost of walking the wrong path. Something shifted in Granger's expression, not quite hope, but perhaps its precursor. The capacity to imagine a future beyond the cycle of violence and retribution that had defined his existence for so long. I'll consider it, he said finally, unconsciously mirroring Harlan's response to Nayaka. After Washington, Harlan nodded, accepting this as the most either of them could offer in the moment. They were too shaped by their shared past for easy reconciliation, but perhaps understanding was sufficient foundation for whatever came next. As the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, the gorge gradually emptied Junior's group and Chivington's prisoners heading south toward Fort Stanton, escorted by Ridge and half of Harlan's men. Nyaka's warriors melted back into the landscape, visible one moment, gone the next, returning to their own territories with the promise that representatives would follow the documents to Washington. Eventually, only Harlan, Parker, Benji, and a handful of others remained preparing for their own journey back to the ranch. Liberty stood patiently beside his master, seemingly content now that the tension had dissipated. "Ready when you are, Colonel," Parker reported, approaching with their horses. "Should make good time before nightfall." Harlan nodded, his gaze lingering on the blood-red walls of the gorge, where so much had been resolved, yet so much remained unfinished. The weight of 15 years had shifted, but not lifted entirely. Perhaps it never would. "Parker," he said quietly, "I'm considering Nyaka's offer after we settle matters at the ranch." The old scout studied him with eyes that had witnessed decades of frontier change. "Thought you might be. Good land up north. Peaceful mostly." He adjusted his hat thoughtfully. "Might do the boy good too. Learn his people's ways." "You'd come along?" Harlan asked, mildly surprised. Parker snorted. "Where else would I go, too old to start fresh with strangers?" He gestured to Liberty. "Besides, someone has to help with that ornery beast. He only listens to you and me." As if understanding, Liberty tossed his head and snorted, eliciting a rare smile from Harlan. "One task at a time," the colonel said, mounting up. "First we see what's left of home." They rode from the gorge as sunset painted the western sky in shades of amber and crimson, the same colors that had greeted Harlan at dawn. A full circle, as Nyaka might say, an ending and beginning wrapped together. Liberty moved with the steady confidence of a horse who knew both his rider and his own strength, aging, but unbowed, bearing the scars of past battles, yet still capable of carrying his master forward. Like Harlan himself, the stallion had survived beyond his expected time, adapting to a changing world that had less use for warriors with each passing year. Yet as they crested the ridge overlooking the plains beyond, Liberty lifted his head and bugled a challenge to the coming night, a sound of defiance and life that echoed across the empty spaces. The last roar of an old war horse, perhaps, but one that carried not despair, but determination. Harlan patted the stallion's neck, feeling the powerful muscles beneath his hand. "Well said, old friend," he murmured. "Well said indeed." They rode on as stars began to appear overhead, following not the path behind, but the one ahead toward whatever redemption remained possible for men who had seen too much, done too much, and somehow survived to tell the tale. Not a happy ending, perhaps, but an honest one. And after 15 years of living with lies, Harlan found that truth, however painful, was the only foundation upon which anything of value could be built. Liberty seemed to agree, his stride lengthening as they turned homeward, bearing his rider toward whatever awaited beyond the bloodstained past, be it justice, peace, or simply the chance to roar one final time before the changing winds of history swept them all away.